I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein, and our subject today is architecture, design, and urban life. And our guest is one of the most significant influences on that landscape. It's a special pleasure for me to introduce one of the most distinguished architects in the world, I.M. Pei.
Oh my gosh. Thank
you. A warm welcome to you. It's harder than ever, I guess, to figure out what's happening in architecture. It's no secret that there is no dominant philosophy in architecture. It's also no secret that there has rarely been a time of more experimentation and ferment than there is now. Are you pleased? Are you distressed? Are you encouraged about what's going on in architecture today?
Certainly I'm not distressed. We've just gone through one revolution, beginning after the First World War. And you know about names like Gropius, like Bauhaus, Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe. That's the period of revolution. I think that, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have constant revolution, but I think more properly said, I think there should be constant change, but not constant revolution. I think we've gone through one. It's time for consolidation, for taking stock, and we're right in that period.
What is the major design issue that faces us today?
I think the major design issue is to see what we have learned from the past. Now, after a significant movement such as Bauhaus, what it gave to those of us who came along, I consider myself sort of second generation, the generation that followed these pioneers. I think what they've done is that they've given us tremendous a sense of confidence about what has happened, why it happened. And that confidence makes it possible for us to look back into the past. So in that way, I'm a conservative.
Why don't we look back into your past for a while and start about, I guess, 43 years ago, when you first came to China, came from China to this country. You came to study. Did you know where or what you wanted to study at that time? What we're really interested in, obviously, is how your present sensibilities evolved.
To tell you frankly, I didn't know anything about what architecture was at that time. All I was interested in is to learn how to build. And it's only after I've reached these shores, or after I've entered MIT, that I discovered that you can be a contractor in order to build, you can be an engineer, or you can be an architect. So I had to make a choice. So it's that simple. I didn't really know what architecture was. It's just that I wanted to learn to build.
Once at MIT and then at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, you came in very close contact with some of the names that you just mentioned. And I'm thinking of Gropius, Mies. And you were there during that period. What was the prevailing philosophy at the time?
That was a very wonderful period. I think, to begin with, there weren't very many boys around. They all went to war. And being an alien at that time, I was able to stay behind at least 1 year longer. And so therefore, we pretty much had the entire faculty to ourselves. To be sure, there were some South Americans and others, but there are a lot of lady architects and a lot of foreigners and so on, which makes life interesting. But what I prize the most, I think, is that these professors like Gropius, like Wagner, like Breuer, they all had time. And we were able to spend lots of time together. And this, you learn more from their life than from what they talked about in the classroom. I don't think that ever happened again, and unfortunately for students afterwards, that never happened again.
Well, what was particularly striking to you during that period? Certainly,
try to understand why Bauhaus, why the change, why the struggle. And you can't really learn it from textbook. You really have to learn by asking these people who fought the wars, actually, why they did it. And that understanding served me well.
Several weeks ago, we had as a guest Philip Johnson, who was one of the first, obviously, to adopt the international style, and he is surely one of the first to abandon it. He termed the period that we are in now as a postmodernist age. Would you agree with that description, and what does that mean to you?
As a label, I think you can interpret it either way, but I would in general say yes, we have gone past that modernist stage. From that point on, talking about what's coming next, where we are at now, I think we may be talking about something a little different between the two of us. But I think in general, I say yes, we have passed that period. We're going on into the next phase.
And what is the next phase?
I think it's a continuation of the first. I don't see it as a break. I see it as something that's absolutely continuous. We're evolving now. I think we're changing, as we should. But that one big battle that was fought after the First World War, I think remain relevant today. At the moment, we can talk about all kinds of stylistic differences. But in the long stretch of history, they will look very, very much alike. And there will be hardly any discernible ripple from one generation to the next. So I'm not what shall I say, as concerned about the abrupt change that some claim that is now taking place in architecture. I don't see it.
A man to whom you give a great deal of credit yourself, certainly in developing a special operational expertise and providing you with an opportunity to change some of the urban landscape early on. I am thinking, obviously, of William Zeckendorf, who was the then president of Webanap. What did you do for him during that period, and what did you learn from him?
Here again, I think when I first accepted the position that he offered, I made it very clear to him that I could very well one day, just tell him, say, well, look here, I'm going to go back to China. He said, perfectly all right with me. You just come and stay as long as you want to. So therefore, the precondition was set. And little did I realize I stayed with him for almost 11 years. So therefore, the first 2 years, we really didn't accomplish very much. We talked a lot. We got to know each other. We dreamt a lot. It was during that year those years that he and I came out with this idea, which was never built, unfortunately.
The Helix building?
The Helix, yes, the Helix. And I think I designed his office, and that's about all.
But that's par for the course for architects of any age and stage, where much of it is certainly a visionary profession. He was that kind of a person. He sort of encouraged it. But from 1951 on, I became serious. And he was ready also to become serious. So, for better or for worse, we built a lot together, a great deal, much more than you realize. Not in New York. Was your first project in Denver?
Yes, the first one was in Denver. And then we moved to Washington. We moved to Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, all over. We built together, I think, almost $500 million worth of work. And in those days, it was a lot. And
was most of that work urban housing, repetitive housing, that helped you develop certain technological and design expertise?
That's the less important part. I think some of you will remember the post-war period. There were a lot of young men coming back. And the concern of the American government then was, how can we find work for the young people? And this is how Title I came about. And urban redevelopment became the tool to rebuild our cities. And Zeckendorf, with his vision, saw the potential of this idea. You see, urban redevelopment back in 1949, that's the Urban Housing Act, provided for this arrangement that the federal government will pay 2/3 if the city and state will pay the other 1/3 to redevelop our slums all over the big cities in America. The excesses, the mistakes were made. I mean, Moses, for instance, have taken advantage of that and really did something pretty bad, I think, to New York. But there were, at that time, it seemed like the most ideal program to really rebuild our cities. Zeckendorf saw that potential and walked right into it, and I walked into it with him. So therefore, that is more important, I think, than the technological side of building urban housing.
Whatever happened to the promise of urban renewal?
I think largely a change of time and also excesses. All the cities took advantage of this handout, shall we say, and started to wholesale, in a wholesale manner, to demolish slums. And the social dislocation was tremendous. I think all of you here remember Jane Jacobs. Gratefully remember Jane Jacobs. She's no longer in New York now, but
About to come back?
she is the first one to shout against it. And I think that's one of the reasons why Title I slowly disappeared from the scene. That the wholesale dislocation of destruction of a section of a city, you know, slum to be sure, but it has a social fabric which is there, and there's no way to reconstitute it by rebuilding. And the human cost was simply, the social cost was simply too great. But the idea, though, that the federal government should undertake to assist local cities and municipalities to rebuild the slum is still sound, because we can't do it without federal help. Simply
Do you
no
see
way.
any possibility in terms of the Federal Tax Reform Act of 1976 that is only now being implemented for localities for the use of some of that fund, of those funds, for the renewal of areas through either historic preservation or the adaptive reuse of existing structures?
Yes, I think it's beginning to help. I think that the Carter administration is taking a very small step in that direction. But it's a very, very small step. I don't have the numbers and figures to be able to make the comparison. It was under Eisenhower, a Republican president, by the way, the Title I really got its first start. The kind of federal budget set aside for rebuilding of cities in the early 50s till almost the early 60s, that decade, and compare with the piddling sums that are being expended for our cities today, show that we have a long way to go to catch up with what we have been able to do once. So in spite of mistakes that we've made, I think we should once again remind the federal government that this is a task that the city alone cannot shoulder.
It's obviously reflected in many of the projects that you do. And you mentioned in this earlier project that you used a team approach, a designer, a project architect. I assume that was the genesis of the approach of I.M. Pei and his many, many, many associates. What is the philosophy of that partnership? How does that office work?
We're not really an efficient firm. I will be first to protest. I wish we were. I wish there were an ideal way where efficiency doesn't stand in the way of the product, of the result. For instance, we're not really a large organization like SOM is.
How large an organization is not very large by your standards?
We're about 125, 130, around that. So a medium-sized office. We're really a collection of small offices. The efficient way to run a big office, or an office of our size, is to run it horizontally. And that means that you develop specialized departments, design department, working drawings department, planning department, construction department, specifications, and so on. That's the way to do it, because then you can, fewer people can serve a larger number of jobs. Now, we chose not to do that. Way back in the web and app days, we decided against it. And we're still doing it. We're still doing the vertical way, and that means that we set up a team with the requisite skills, and that team will stay on the job from the beginning to end. And this way, we do not get the benefit of efficient operation. There's a lot of what we call reinventing the wheel. There's an awful lot of that going on in our office, and we know that. But on the other hand, I think what we get is that tremendous dedication of those members of that team to that project. Now, you can't get that if you do it in the efficient and the horizontal manner, because once he's through with the specifications, he forgot about that project and he moves on to the next. But not the way we worked it. That team will stay with that project for the duration of the project. And that dedication that you can't get from the young, that dedication without that kind of association with one project. So we still prefer that, inefficient though it is.
About 10 years ago, the National Gallery realized it had outgrown its West building. That building, I guess, was designed from 1937 through 1941.
A little earlier than that, but good enough. Yes.
Well, please correct me. We want to be accurate.
Yes.
In any case, the building did open in 1941. A neo-classical Beaux-Arts structure designed by John Russell Pope. A building, by the way, that I guess no one would term as an adventuresome one, even in that period. The very same time, to put it in some context, Frank Lloyd Wright had already designed Falling Water. Mies was working on IIT. So in that context, it was a traditional building.
Indeed.
And after many years of planning and dedication, on June 1st, 1978, the National Gallery opens its dramatic new edition. And that is designed by our guest tonight, I.M. Pei. I wonder if you can tell us about this monumental structure built on the, I guess, last available piece of land. On, if there is a sacred street in our country, it is certainly that one. If you could tell us some of the inspiration for the building and some of the constrictions. Why that piece of land? Why that shape building?
To begin with, I think you have to know which piece of land Mrs. Diamonstein referred to. It's the piece of land that is at the intersection of two streets, of Constitution Avenue and Pennsylvania Avenue. Constitution runs on a grid. Pennsylvania, as you know, and Independence runs on a diagonal. Now, that diagonal grid was created by Major L'Enfant 200 years ago. And that grid line, the diagonal grid line, actually is French, originally French in inspiration. So you will see lots of such odd-shaped buildings in Paris. If you search for it, there are lots of them. And we happen to have one of those, which is a triangular piece of land. So given that piece of land,
you might tell us how you were given that piece of land too.
Oh yes. Now this piece of land was asked for by Andrew Mellon way back in the early 30s. Before he even decided to construct the first building, he asked Congress to reserve a piece of land for the future expansion of the National Gallery. It's a very far-sighted person. I mean, looking back at it, it's incredible. Of course, they did not expect that they would outgrow their present quarters in such a short time. It was finished, yes, you opened in 41, you're right, but started long before 37. see now, from 41 to the date that when they came to us was 1967. It's only about less than, it's a little more than 25 years, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, it's only 25 years they would outgrow an enormous building. So that was quite far-sighted. So therefore, that piece of land was reserved.
It's also the terminal point.
Yes, it's the last site before you get to the capital of the United States. So it is the terminal, the last site. There's a twin on the other side yet to be built on. But I would like to see what another architect would do with a triangular site on the other side. I think it would be very interesting. It's a very, very unusual site, and it's a very difficult site. And you will see the building, and I want you to see whether we have solved the triangular problem.
Well, for those of us who are not architects or who have not yet seen that trapezoidal shape, can you describe the building to us? You did select that pink-tinged Tennessee marble. But to give the building more definition, one of the design problems that you dealt with were those mitered edges. How do you do that with marble? How do you have such long-running spans of marble on the exterior without what appears to be usual kinds of supports, narrow?
This is a technical question. You'll get a technical answer.
Please.
Some of you may not be interested in it, but since you asked this question, I'll talk about it. Now I want to blow my own horn. We have a very good office. I don't mean myself. And the reason our office is that size is that you have to be certain size before you can have specialists in the office. And we have very talented specialists in our office. I'm very proud of that fact. Now, the marble is only one example. And John Hancock glass is another, which I will talk about too if you want to know. You see,
I really want to know about neoprene gaskets for a girl
now I'll
who
talk about
can't
the
manage
marble. The marble, when you think of building a marble building, you say, oh my gosh, you have no problem because it's been, all kinds of marble buildings being built, and they all look like they stand up, and they look like that. Look at the pyramids; it's still here. But little did they know that as the stone gets thinner and thinner, the problem become serious. The early buildings, including the John Russell Pope's building, were marble this thick, 7 to 9 inches thick. And when you have a piece of stone that thick, it's almost inert. Almost inert. But nothing is really inert, but almost inert, which means that it will not expand and contract very much. With the cycle of sun and shadow is such that it does not penetrate deep enough. So you don't really have to worry about it. But even then, we have seen in Pope's buildings, particularly along the moat walls, where marble of that thickness were actually torn apart. And they have to be constantly re-putty, so to speak. The joints were opening up, and then you have to go back and re-putty it, and then open up again. So we decided that since we cannot afford stones of that thickness, we've got to do something about solving that problem of expansion and contraction of stone. Expansion and contraction of stone. So the solution that we came up with is to use a neoprene gasket. And we groove the stone. Each stone, 2 feet by 5 feet, is grooved in the middle and surrounded by a neoprene gasket. And that is an invention of the office. And we patented it, and I think people will use that design very soon. This gasket permits each stone to expand and contract by itself, so that there's no accumulation of stresses. When you don't get accumulation of stresses, you don't get these enormous cracks, which you find in marble buildings. Which you also don't get is the constantly falling out of the joints. So this building is almost maintenance-free, I would say. And it's been up now, the marble has been up now 4 years. And
how did you find marble to match the existing building?
We haven't really succeeded to match the existing. We had to go back to Tennessee to open the same quarries. And, but they're different. Each quarry, each vein produce slightly different marble. But I think the match...
Do you use the same gradations as Coke?
Yes, we use the same gradation. To show you that
It's lighter and darker, you might explain.
Might not be revolutionary, but he was a great refinement. He's a man of great refinement in his design. He designed the original building with dark stone in the bottom and then get up to almost white stone at the very top. Next time you go to Washington, look at that building. You see that the white dome, the dome is almost white, but at the base of the building is almost brown. And we tried to do the same thing, but we have not succeeded. I would say that there's a disappointment there.
Even though you have the same quarry, the same marble man?
Same marble man. There's, in fact, the same person who selected stone for Pope 70-some years old now was engaged by us to select marble for us. But each quarry is different. You open it up and the gradations are different. So with time, though, I think the two buildings will probably will blend. But right now, I think our building is lighter in color than the old.
Many people say that the design is really about the interior, that one enters a small door and comes upon this soaring space filled with balconies and bridges and quite a remarkable arrangement of space. What was the approach? How did you determine what was the best way either to view pictures or to be a viewer of pictures?
I think before we talk about viewing pictures, which you would think is the most important function of a museum, I would like to stress something else which may be a surprise to you, and that is that 90% of the people visiting this museum, that will visit this museum, are not art lovers, will not be art lovers. There are people who are coming to look at the Air and Space Museum, look at the flowering cherry trees, look at the Washington Monument, and then say, well, let's go and look at the National Gallery. So once you realize that, you all of a sudden have a very different kind of a challenge. You have almost a problem trying to say, well, this is not for the curators or for you or for the directors or for people who are interested in art alone. They're people we want to convert, we want to educate, we want to bring them, we want to interest them in art. So therefore, our first challenge is to make this an exciting place to be.
So that you're really designing for a museum constituency of the last fifth of the 20th century that is more mobile, less committed to the subject, and as a result, there are certain design features within the museum that reflect that.
Yes, and design for the young. I think particularly the young, and I think we want them to feel that museum going is a pleasurable experience, number one. And then having experienced it that way, then I think they will linger a bit longer and perhaps look at art. And then the next time you say, well, I'd like to go back, I think that is the important. So when you see our building go in, I think there is a sort of a little bit of excitement inside. There's a bit of fun and games in the inside of this building.
Tell us about some of that.
It's impossible to describe architecture.
You can tell us about a waterfall.
First of all, inside. It's a enclosed garden court, a very large one. It's almost like a piazza, but enclosed, which means that the sunlight comes in, but it's cool in the summer and heated in the winter. All right, so it's a place that nice to be in. And
can you describe that skylight that permits that sunlight to come in? Because that is a major feature of the interior.
Yes, it's a very large span. This space is so big inside that it's almost like a small piazza, but it's covered. And because of the big space, we have to use big span. And big spans, in this case, were clearly expressed in the structure. And you'll see it when you walk in, that you see the space frame, which holds glass. And in addition to glass, holds sunscreen to cut off the sunlight so that we don't get too much sun to come into the space. So therefore, it's a sunlit space, but it's quite a lively space. And we have enough light to grow trees and flowers inside, for instance, which I think people always like. They like to come into a place like that. They like we'll have very special art in this space, because the scale of this space is so huge that conventional art that you find in a gallery which is simply not be big enough for it. So therefore, we have to commission special art for that space. But you don't need very many pieces of art to make that space come
How
alive.
involved are you in the selection and commissioning of some of those special works of art?
Very deeply involved. I would say on half a dozen of those pieces, I would say that the director and myself are almost the two persons. That's simple as that.
Can you tell us about some of those commissions?
Well, now, first of all, I think that we have to. The National Gallery is not a place. It's not an experimental place. It's in a way, I think, it's more like a pantheon. An artist is received, acknowledged only after it has reached a certain position in the art world. So therefore, these choices may seem like sort of a rather timid choices, but nevertheless, if you understand the nature of that gallery, you would understand why we make these choices. We've chosen Henry Moore, and his piece is now on the ocean, and it will shortly arrive.
What is the scale of that piece, so we have some idea?
That piece it's a bronze. It's about 18 feet high and about 25 feet wide. Enormous. We have chosen Calder. In fact, it's the last piece Calder did before he died.
That is already in place.
And that's a mobile. It's not a stabile. It's a mobile. It's enormous. Has a reach of about 65 feet. You know how big that is. And it moves. And it's moving constantly now in that space. And that's installed. That's the first piece to be installed. And it's a very successful piece. I think Calder would have liked it. I think he would have been very, very happy to see it there. And the third one has already arrived, is a Miro. It's a big tapestry by Miro. And yes, Motherwell will do not a collage, it's a painting.
It is.
It's an enormous painting. It's a painting that I think is 30 feet long. And that's a commissioned piece as well. So that piece is also finished. Hasn't been installed yet, but it's finished. It's after his Spanish Elegy series. So it's a very powerful graphic piece of graphic design. I think that will be very successful there as well. So I think all in all, I think so far, I think it's not I would have liked to see, for instance, Oldenburg to come in and do a piece, and we may. But for the time being, I think we've got to get these major, established, acknowledged artists, get them in first. And then I think we can then begin to reach out.
And among the other astronomical things connected with it, you must forgive me, I am, is its cost. The latest cost was something like $94.4 million. Something yes? What my real question is,
yes.
if I may, is since this is the National Gallery, of what cost was this to the government and to the taxpayers? How much of that, of construction and other related costs, net costs, are reflected either in the government or we the taxpayers?
Nothing. Every cent comes from private source, and it's mostly from the Mellon Foundation, Mr. Mellon's own resource. It's almost a family gift to the nation.
So this is another Mellon gift to the nation.
It's a Mellon's gift to the nation. I think the cost is right. But then you also should know how the cost goes, how the money is spent. But first of all, I'll tell you how big it is. The first National Gallery, designed by John Russell Pope, is 450,000 square feet. But the new National Gallery building, East Building, is 600,000 square feet. Okay? All right, so we're very much bigger. Most of our building, not most of it, I would say more than 40% of the building is underground. You don't see. So what you see above ground is only it's like an iceberg. This East Building is not just a museum. The museum portion is only half of it. The other half is a center of advanced studies for the visual arts. You see, the National Gallery's trustees believe, and I think they're right, that the future is not attracting people to come to the museum, but rather bring art to the people. But at the same time, though, I must say that we've got to think in terms of the public which is not yet attracted to museum going.
When does
Not yet
museum
attracted.
fatigue set in? What is the average length of time that the museum goer?
This is very important. You're absolutely right about that. It's not the measure of time or distance. It's a measure if the experience is pleasurable. You can be there a whole day and you not feel tired. Really, you may be tired at night. But if it's a boring place, a mausoleum, let's say, you'll be tired in half an hour. So I think I'd once again say that it's not the heroic qualities that we should capture, but I think museum going should be a pleasurable experience. It must be